Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. Thank you for tuning in this morning for our updated records retention schedule webinar. My name is Mandy Kalinskis. I am the marketing coordinator here at Datamation Imaging Services. Just a few couple housewarming things to get started. First of all, as I said before and I said in the chat, please make sure that you grab the handouts from the handouts section. It's a copy of this slide deck and also the white paper that we are going to be talking about and was mentioned in the email. Also, if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to put them into the chat and we will get to them at the end. And then finally, this webinar is being recorded and it will be sent to you in about 24 hours. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our speaker today, which is Jim Collins, who is a principal here at Datamation.
Thanks, Mandy. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for taking time out of your days to listen to this webinar. I'm going to hit on three different main areas. The first one is document retention and the importance of it and some of the benefits of it. I'm going to hit the new guidelines that I got from the state of Illinois just last month. And then I'm going to just talk about a couple of methods of how to approach it. And we're only going to go for about 15 minutes here because I'm only going to focus on the changes and the new stuff. Everything else was in a previous webinar we did about a year and a half ago that got into much more detail on document retention guidelines. Now, the importance of following retention, obviously the first thing, it keeps you in compliance with all those regulations, FOIA, FERPA, SOPPA, which is the new one we did, and we also did a webinar on this back in February, I believe, which it has to do with all the student data in all these systems and how it needs to be protected, and it's incumbent upon you to make sure this vendor is keeping it private and secure. It also rids you of keeping unnecessary records to manage. And as a result, it saves a lot of storage space. And the most important thing is that it improves privacy. We do a lot of work for insurance companies, and they give us files that are 60 and 80 years old, which are old policies that they want deleted and expunged because they don't want that content getting out because they don't insure as much as they used to in the past. And obviously, it lends to district efficiency. We took a lot of records out of one district up north, and they freed up an entire classroom as a result. The three cardinal rules to best practice in document retention are as following. Number one, everything must be in writing, and every district has this in writing. The problem is a lot of districts haven't updated it for 10 or 15 years. The second thing is this must be reviewed by your legal counsel and approved by your school board, all right? And the third thing is that you need to work with the Secretary of State's office to get approval from the State Records Archive Unit to retain these things a certain time before you can destroy it. I emphasize these are guidelines, these are not etched in stone. You can keep things longer or shorter, but you need to set the precedent in your district. But I will tell you that 9 times out of 10, the legal counsel is going to come back and say, hey, let's default this to the state standards. Now, this white paper I wrote 2 years ago and updated last month has 147 different classes of documents and 9 record types, starting with personnel. And then you've got records under the stewardship of the superintendent, financial records, student records, special ed records, admin records, buildings and ground, transportation, and the infamous other. And again, I'm going to dive right into what I learned from the state on my meeting last month. Starting out with personnel HR records. Resignations, you only need to keep 5 years, okay? In the past, this was a permanent record. Now, there's an exception to that, in that if a resignation is part of the board minutes, it's a permanent record because it's part of the board minutes, which is a permanent record. Reduction in workforce surveys and records, you only need to keep those records for 2 years, used to be 5 years. So you can kind of see a trend here where a lot of this stuff is not required to be kept as long as it had in the past. Superintendent records, okay? When you do a search for a new superintendent, all those search and interview records and notes, you only need to keep 2 years following when you hired that superintendent. And it also should be part of that employment record, okay? And they emphasize these are kept a lot longer typically. FOIA training certificates and open meeting records are only 2 years. And you know what they're saying here by 2 years is, hey, your FOIA officer needs to get trained and update training on FOIA at least every 2 years or more frequently. Like I said, it's about a 2.5 hour process. It's about 90 screens you go through in about 2 hours. and there's a link on the Secretary of State site. All right, some new things, and I'm going to qualify that this is all I know on this right now. Audio-visual meeting recordings are 90 days, and this is under consideration. This has not been approved by the state, but given COVID and everybody using Zoom and all these other meeting sites, that's what they're kind of saying right now. This is something you should discuss at a board meeting of how you manage this. And then online meetings is also under consideration. They're saying you should keep the online portion 18 months unless it's a board meeting, which is permanent, unless you have the board records, which could be permanent. Now, whether you're using a GoToMeeting, a Zoom, a Teams, a WebEx, they all have vehicles in there where they'll store this stuff, and you can do that. Or you can have your IT person store the audiovisual file. I warn you, they can be very large. If a meeting goes more than 20 or 30 minutes, they're large files. Or you could put it in a content management system. And again, the difference, as I understand it, is a meeting recording is just like a de facto thing where 3 people in your district are on a meeting. And an online meeting is a formal meeting, like everybody in the business office or the board or something like that. Financial records, insurance policies and claims. They're saying 7 years is post-expiration, cancellation, or whenever they become inactive for both policies and claims. I don't think that's changed, but what they did emphasize is that if there's a minor involved in a claim, you need to keep the policy and the claim for 30 years, okay? And then property appraisals, they're saying you only need to keep 3 years. It used to be 7 years. Again, another symbol that, you know, they're making us keep things for a lesser period of time. For all the record types for student files, the only one they said that they wanted us to focus on was the student accident report, and that is 5 years. Now, I don't know, and I don't think that's a change, and I have to check on this. I think it's more of an emphasis that they said 8 out of 10 school districts keep the accident report in the PERM file, and they shouldn't. They should keep it in the TEM file and just keep it for 5 years. And this is a common thing that happens. So I think it was more of a point of emphasis than a new retention guideline. This screen is Steve Colazzi. He's with the Secretary of State's office that I work with, and he helps me with a lot of these records guidelines. And I know that a lot of people on this webinar have met with Steve, and he's given you applications to dispose records once they've met the retention guideline. And one of those applications typically looks like this. It's a 35-page document with many, many document classes on it. Here it's just saying, all right, you've got budget and appropriation records. You can get rid of anything that's older than 7 years old. So typically what you do is you get all the files ready, send in the application with the state, and they get back to you 1 to 6 months later saying, all right, it's okay to dispose of it. I want to talk more about electronic records because things are going more and more electronic. And when you have a record scanned or an electronic report, it helps with the retention because you've got the file named, you've got a file date, and you've got the key elements to allow a retention to happen from that. Okay, metadata was what I was trying to say there. So you have a lot of key aspects of the file of who created it, the date, the time, the date, and the type of file. When it's electronic, you can put it into a database and easily find it by the date, the type of record, to, from, all kinds of things. They can also be made searchable. As you know, when you have a nice PDF up there and you can do a control find and find something quickly, that's a real benefit and a time saver. And it's not just for scanned paper documents. An imaging system can store images, videos, Word documents, all kinds of office criteria. And also we've done lately a lot of archiving data from legacy older systems, especially these districts. They take an IEP system and they get a new one, and then they don't know what to do with their old one. And so what we've done is taken their old system, archived the data, put it in a content management system, and now they no longer have to keep that old disparate system, and they can sunset it, and they don't need to pay support on it. They don't need to keep people trained on it, so on and so forth. And let me just kind of show you an example of a couple kinds of content. I'm logging into a system called Image Silo, which is a content management system. This is a very popular system among school districts. We also sell Laserfish, Square 9. So we have different vendors that we have content management systems for. And when you log in, you basically have these buckets of different record types: student files, special ed personnel, business office. I just want to show you a couple things in the business office. And when you open up the business office, the first thing we do is kind of do a subsort of all the different record types within business office, whether it's financial, payroll, AP, buildings and grounds, whatever. And then you can search on that. One of the things I wanted to show you, and I just did this a few years ago, this was a green bar report for a district down in Joliet, and it was 400 pages long, and it was from 1999, and it was a year-end summary report of their payroll. And that's a record that you have to keep 60 years. So this payroll report, we scanned it, we made it text searchable, and for example, somebody could call up and say, did Ted Jones work in that district in 1995? They could go to this report, do a search on his name, and find it immediately. Something else I wanted to show you is that we can take a census report, student files off of a Skyward, off of an IEP system, off of an Infinite Campus, and archive them here. I see that a lot of districts, they keep data on these systems for a long time, and it's much more efficient not to, and then we can just archive in a system like this for archival purposes, retention purposes, and occasional lookup. Okay, and this can be a report, or we can literally take every student file or HR file, whatever this report is, and segment it and store it separately by that individual. And the last thing I wanted to show from a content standpoint is a drawing. All right, this is a 36-inch by 48-inch drawing, buildings and grounds. Obviously, you got to keep these things until the building in your district no longer exists. So this is a water pump for a school district, and I can blow up on it and look at it. And what's cool about this is I could take all the drawings for a specific school building and grant access to an architect. And that architect could look at these drawings, and maybe the architect's doing a new parking lot or a new roof or doing work on that building. And they could probably be much more efficient and spend less time and charge the district less for architectural services by having all these archived in digital, and they could look at them remotely and probably do their job more efficiently. Okay, just log off of that. So I just wanted to show that briefly. I don't want to make this a sales call here. And again, focusing on the benefits of electronic records and not just scanning paper is very, very important. So again, something to look at. I was at a district back in March, right before COVID, and this district had a Windows 95 PC with transcripts on it going back to 1960. And they had to go down in that basement like 2 or 3 times a quarter and fire up that machine to find one. And I'm still working with them, but they need to get those records off into something in a better archival situation. The last part of the presentation, how to approach it. What do I do? Okay. One service that my company offers is called data acquisition. And let's say we come into your office and we take 150 boxes of records, all kinds of records. What we'll do is a document retention analysis on those and a document disposition review. In doing this, and the many times we've done it, more than 30 to 50% of the records are eligible to be destroyed right away. All right. And what we give you is a spreadsheet back with a row for every box. And we say, here are the contents of the box and the description of it. And we take time and look at the different files in the box. We say they're from 1995, and we give you the date when they're from. We categorize them into the proper document class, and we'll give you a recommended disposition. All right, we'll say, hey, these are special ed files that are 20 years old. You can destroy these. These are invoices that are 8 years old. You can destroy these. Okay, these are student files that are 20 years old. You may want to consider keeping or scanning these because you got to keep them another 40 years. So that's essentially what we do. So the first thing is we'll cut off and say, hey, we can destroy a third of this. Well, let's more granularly look at the rest of it and decide what, if anything, we do with it. Do we store it and destroy it within a year? Do we scan it? What do we do? And that's a very popular thing among school districts and other companies. So what to do? All right, review your document retention schedule. Take the new white paper I wrote, which is basically, I created that from many document retention schedules, and update yours, go to your board, go to your legal, and get the thing approved. Keep up to date on recent legal changes. The most compelling thing right now, in my opinion, is the SOPPA law, which is going to be enforced starting July 1st, 2021, which means you really have to hold your vendors' hands to the fire as far as compliance and privacy and security. We also had a webinar we did about 1.5 years ago about document retention and got into it in a much more detailed basis. I'll send you the link to that if you would like to watch it. And then the last thing is implement a retention policy and a solution. Dust off your retention policy, update it, get it approved. Let's see what we can do with those records. And let's, possibly shred a whole bunch that you don't need. And you could possibly implement an imaging solution. I could take a sample of your student files, of your accounts payable, of your personnel, of your board minutes, put it up on a site and let you guys kind of kick the tires with it for 90 days. We call that a test drive. It's no charge. We do that to give you an idea of what it would be like. In summary, wrapping it up, we're going to have a recording of this, and as Mandy said, we're going to email you a link to it probably tomorrow around this time. Make sure you grab the white paper handout now, or it'll be emailed to you separately as well. And then we're going to stay on for a couple minutes here to see if we have any questions, and then I'll turn it back over to Mandy.
Thank you so much, Jim. Oh, I skipped ahead. So first of all, I see that we do have some questions in the chat, so I will take a look at that very shortly. But again, if you don't have a question now, if you have it this afternoon, tomorrow, 2 weeks, that's Jim's email on there. You can feel free to contact him at any time, and he'll be able to get you the information that you need. Also, the emails that the webinar emails came from, info@datamationis.com, I will probably answer that for you. So anything like that, you can reach out to us. We're here to help you. We know that there is a lot going on for school districts right now, and retention shouldn't be your primary headache. So we want to make sure we can help you get the information you need. So let me take a question. Let me take a look at the questions right now. So the question is, what about staff accident reports, Jim?
Staff what?
Staff accident reports?
I will check that.
We will check. If it's not in the handout, we will find out for you. So again, take a look at the white paper. If it's not in there, we'll find out for you. Next question is, employees will submit marriage certificates, birth certificates, legal documents, etc., to have a dependent added or removed from their medical insurance plan. Do we need to keep copies of these documents?
You do need to keep copies of those, at least for the interim time for the when that policy is active and those dependents are being covered. I will find out more information on exactly how long you do need to keep those, but I don't know offhand what they are. It's similar to when you have to get utility bills and things like that to prove registration in a district. So I will also have a full slate answer to that as well, that I'll have maybe sent out to the group later.
Okay, and just in case you guys just didn't hear that, Jim said yes, we're going to need to keep them in the interim, just kind of like you would need to keep the things for when students register, but we'll find out a more specific time frame for you. But yes, you are going to need to keep that in the interim. And then finally, can you speak to the retention of emails? We actually spoke about this before, and Jim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that they said emails, it depends on the content of the email, what it is about. So if it is in regards to a student accident report, that would be in the temp file with the 5 years. If it has to do with minutes, that would be permanent. If it has to do with AP, then it's probably more like 7 years. So it depends on what the content of the email is. If we don't have that in the white paper, that is something though we did have a question about. Yeah, and that's another point Jim said. You can also store your emails in a content management system on a server, things like that. You just have to put, you can just save them right up there and put the same kind of retention guidelines on them so that when those AP files come up for deletion, so do the emails. Okay, and then I have one more question, which is I have a bunch of scanned files, but they're just PDFs stored up on a server, and it's really hard to find what I'm looking for. Do you have any advice?
One thing I would say about that is when I mentioned the data acquisition before, the data acquisition service, that's one of the reasons we call it that, is because it doesn't have to be for just paper files or other content. It can be for data as well. But if everything's in PDF, there's two things that are for sure. Number one, it has a date on it. So we will be able to take that and store the date into the system, so we can import those into the system. And it also is probably in a file folder by the content of it, whether it's a student file. It also probably has the year the student withdrew from your district. And we can map all those fields, the name of the file, the folder it was in, the file date, into a system, and then do some cleanup after that. So that's one way to handle it. It's probably the best way. It's actually a software called Directory Manager, where it just goes and it imports everything in based upon a disciplined, structured set of rules of mapping and naming. So good question.
Okay, I didn't see any more questions coming in. So again, if you have some later today, tomorrow, 2 weeks from now, feel free to email Jim the info. Otherwise, we'll get these materials to you soon. And I hope you have an excellent rest of your day. Goodbye.